Well, good afternoon, everyone. I think you can all hear us. We're trying this webinar format, but I do want to welcome everybody to today's HLI Juntos conversation with a presentation from the Center for the Future of Arizona. This presentation is really interesting and has a lot of really good information. We're going to be recording this conversation and then editing it down so you can have the presentation, and we'll upload it and send a link out. We had a lot of interest with people who weren't able to join that want to see this presentation. So we definitely want to share this because this is a lot of really great information that you can use in the workplace, you can use in your advocacy, and that frankly we need to know about Arizona and about what Arizonans want for their state. So before we get into it and before we introduce our panelists and get into the conversation, I do want to introduce Vital Soul CEO Carmen Heredia, who's joining us. She's a member of the board of the Center for the Future of Arizona, and I wanted to bring her on to share a few thoughts. Carmen, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Adam. You're taking all my thunder. What I'll add is that I'm also an HLI alum, a proud alum of the class of 2008. And yes, I just recently had the honor of joining the board of the Center for the Future of Arizona. It's a big privilege. It's such a well-known and well-regarded organization doing a lot of different programming. But one of the key things that they put out is the Arizona survey. This year's survey is called the Arizona We Want, and it's the second survey commissioned by CFA to the Gallup organization. The first one was done in 2009, and now they've just renewed this a decade later here to check in on what is it that, answering that question, what is it that Arizonans want? And what is really cool, I've seen a presentation on it a number of times, that the report in essence shows that Arizona is a forward-thinking state, and that even if the priorities of some of the decision makers that might be elected to lead the organization aren't in alignment, that really as a population, there is a lot of alignment. And so I think that's fascinating. I'm a data geek. If you didn't know that about me, I'm a big time nerd. And so I love to dive into graphs and data and even just the granular level of data. So it's always awesome to see a huge amount of data summarized for us to really digest and find the meaning behind it. And that's what this report highlights. So supporter of CFA, love that HLI is getting this presentation at HLI alum, because for VIA, HLI, we are trying to build a capable and activated, engaged, diverse group of leaders to, be informed and lead the state and their organizations or, government institutions, wherever you sit as an alum, to the next level. And this is one of the ways to be informed. So Vital Soul and HLI, we look forward to the partnership with CFA. And the presenter today is Christy Tate. She is the Director of Civic Health Initiatives, telling us about the Gallup Arizona report called The Arizona We Want, the Decade Ahead. So Christy, all yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Carmen, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you so much for your service on our board. It's been so exciting to have you join in that leadership role and to have the opportunity to get to work with Adam and just with your organization and with HLI is really, really exciting for us at the center. So I'm really thrilled to have the chance to be here with you all today and to jump in with our presentation. So hopefully y'all can hear me okay. Someone can send me a chat if the audio isn't going through great. And then I will share my screen and get us started. So here we go. This is always the trick, making sure that technology cooperates. Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to jump in. Carmen gave such a wonderful introduction to the mission of the center and the purpose behind this Gallup partnership and survey, but I'm going to give you all even a little bit more context. I'll start by saying that it would be so wonderful to have this discussion with each of you face to face so I could answer questions and hear your thoughts as I go. Knowing that we're in this format that we are today, I will be running through a lot of information. So I would just welcome you to please, through the chat or through the Q&A, to please feel free to offer reflections, comments, questions as I go. And then we'll make sure to stop and have a chance to review and respond to as many of those as possible, because I know it's a lot of information all at once. So as Carmen described, the center, we are a nonprofit organization with really this statewide mission of building a brighter, stronger future for our state. So we do that in really 3 key areas. One is by listening first to Arizonans and understanding what are our shared aspirations and hopes for the future. The second is really providing trusted data on how we're doing on those issues. And then the third is really working alongside partners and communities to drive impact on some of those key priorities. So we as a center have a deep set of work in education, in workforce, and in civic engagement. So I've had the really great privilege of getting to work with Adam and other organizations in the civic leadership, civic engagement space. So that work really is all in service of the Arizona we want, which is our shared vision of success that has really been developed in partnership and in constant conversation with Arizonans to understand what brings us together in terms of our highest hopes and aspirations for the future. So we'll share much more about those insights and how we've developed that over time. And that really speaks to the role of the Gallup survey. The progress meters then are tools that the center has developed, coming from the understanding that we need to understand what we all want first and what are our concerns and our shared priorities to formulate this vision for the future. But we also need to understand how we're doing on those issues. So we, in partnership with many others, have developed progress meters, starting with education in partnership with Expect More Arizona, and many other education leaders across the state. And then growing into these other areas to have data that really comes from trusted, publicly available sources, is easy to understand, and can be guideposts for decision making. So how do we really track, how are we doing on these issues? How do we break that into measurable outcomes, and then ultimately use that information to inform strategy, to inform policy making and investments. So that foundation is really critical and drives us at the center. In this first really milestone survey in 2009 that Carmen described, this was the first of its kind ever in partnership with Gallup. No state has had really, or has really, taken on a project kind of this size and scope to really turn first to the people that live here to say, what matters most to us? What are our kind of hopes for the future? What are our priorities? How are we experiencing life today? So in 2009, that landmark survey became the foundation for the Arizona we want. But over 10 years, so much has changed. And we wanted to understand today, how do we refresh and kind of reimagine and understand what's on Arizonans' minds today? How are we experiencing life? What are we concerned about? What do we want for the future? So that was really kind of the prompt and the catalyst for this 2020 survey. To give you a little bit of the details of how it was designed and with the intention behind it. So this is really a broad-reaching population survey. So questions that I'll touch on today in terms of the results span from jobs and economic opportunity to education, healthcare, civic engagement. So really cross-cutting issues, which makes it unique, designed to be representative. So really critical sampling, attention to oversampling with traditionally underrepresented communities, making sure that the information we had was really trusted. And that's why Gallup was turned to as a key partner in this effort to have that kind of rigorous approach. And then the goal was to really quantify and measure what are our shared public values, what are the things that tie us together in terms of priorities for the future, what are kind of new and maybe emerging issues of focus, particularly relative to the first survey in 2009. And then what are the actions that are going to really move us forward on some of those shared public values? So what I will do now is give you the sneak peek into some of the key findings and what we learned along the way. And again, please feel free to add chat questions. I won't turn to them as I'm presenting, but I will be really happy to come to them at the end of presenting the data. So the major finding of this process, of all of the data that came through, nearly 4,000 responses across the state, was this resounding emphasis on how much Arizonans agree, and really came forward in these 7 shared public values that were quantified and measurable by the responses on the survey questions. So the way that we defined agreement and consensus is really that 70% or above, so pretty high benchmark to reach. And that, to get to that point, meant that you also had really high, strong consensus, regardless of how you look at the data. So rural, urban, looking at education, race and ethnicity, partisan political affiliation, that these were consistent shared values and priorities for the future. And even more than that, there was overwhelming agreement at that same cutoff of 70% and higher on 42 actions that will move us forward as a state. So I'm going to talk about some of the findings and then really come to kind of that action agenda at the end. So the outlook of Arizonans on the future, the kind of overarching finding there was 70% of Arizonans are proud to live here. So I think what you'll see throughout a lot of the data, I present some really interesting assets and positive, kind of optimistic, hopeful themes, and then some challenges that go alongside all of that. So 70% are proud to live here, but only 44% say that Arizona is heading in the right direction, and 23% actually would disagree that Arizona is heading in the right direction. I want to pause on this kind of aspect of outlook as well. Folks were asked if you had to choose between kind of preferencing opportunity, are you looking for improving the quality of life for you and your family through education, career advancement, for example, or preferencing stability? So really focused on supporting your family with a job, safe place to live. You see about an even break here with all Arizonans, with a slight emphasis on stability. And among Black Arizonans, Latino Arizonans, our younger Arizonans, a shift there where there's that emphasis on opportunity. So the context, I think, for all of the survey, really interesting to be looking at across this hunger for opportunity that shows up in education, it shows up in jobs, and in kind of general outlook on the future. So now I'll jump through some of those key shared public values and just give you a few insights on each of these topics. I will say what I share today really just is kind of scratching the surface of the data. So the report itself has much more information, and we would be happy to discuss and share kind of further insights on any one of these topics. But to give you kind of the overview, what we heard really clearly from Arizonans is the understanding that education is key. So 84% believing that highly educated, skilled population, critical for the state's economy. However, alongside that, 26% agreeing K-12 public education is high quality today. Now that, as I mentioned with our progress meters, is something that we're taking a closer look at with our partners and with many of your organizations through the education progress meter. We partner with Expect More Arizona, and many other education leaders to assemble what does it look like to take this comprehensive view of education for the state from early learning through post-secondary. And we know that there are significant disparities in our education outcomes. And we know that there's a significant gap from where we are today to these goals, which you can see here have been set by the education community to reach by 2030. So when we hear only 26% of Arizonans have confidence or feel like the education system is really high quality, when we look at this data, we see where some of that concern is coming from. Now, what we also heard from Arizonans is this really strong hunger for action. So in specific action items, the highest consensus in all of the survey was a tie. One of these was this 92%. So making sure all Arizonan schools have highly qualified teachers and principals. 92% of Arizonans think that's really important for the future, the 10 years ahead. But these other areas as well. So increasing enrollment in post-secondary, closing the gaps for vulnerable children, providing access to reliable internet and technology, reducing financial barriers of going to college. Now, the preschool program, I think, is an interesting data point. And what I want to show is that here you can see 66% of Arizonans think this is important. When you break that down a little bit further, you see, though, that there's really strong support. And when we start to kind of unpack any one of these actions, we find really interesting stories. So 76% of our Latino Arizonans really believe this is critical. 76% of those living in Southeast Arizona are millennials, Arizonans making less than 36,000. So again, really strong, high consensus that we need to look at this closely and figure out what's the action that's going to lead us into the future. Health and well-being, 83% of Arizonans saying it's important to ensure anyone can get quality healthcare without risk of financial harm. That goes alongside there being some significant shared concerns in how Arizonans experience health today. So 60% say they're satisfied with quality of healthcare. So as we've taken a look at that, what that means is actually 40% are dissatisfied. So about 2 million Arizonans that are currently dissatisfied. Issues like availability of mental health care, hugely important and some significant issues and concerns there. We asked questions also about healthy communities, coming from that understanding that the social determinants of health, that community really drives many of these outcomes in health and well-being. So looking at the data by income, Arizonans earning less than 36,000, for example, some serious concerns there. So only 51% saying my community is safe, 55% saying I live in a healthy community. So again, this data helps illuminate and prompt those discussions of how are we as Arizonans experiencing life today that can suggest and prompt dialogue and action to really move the needle on some of those indicators. In health and well-being, there was a number of actions that are really clearly supported. These are just a few. Top of the list, guaranteeing affordable healthcare and insurance for Arizonans with pre-existing health conditions, and making mental health services available and affordable for all Arizonans. So in the kind of array of health issues, those two really bubble up to the top. And I think that emphasis on mental health, really interesting. We've certainly heard that echoed in work we've been doing with younger Arizonans as well. And many of these data points, of course, in the context of the survey being fielded in the fall of 2020. So I'll speak a little bit more about that in this job section as well. So as an overarching question, we asked Arizonans, what are the most important issues to the state's future? And of those that bubbled up to the top, more good paying jobs was in that top list as a critical issue for the future. As I just said, the survey was fielded in the fall during the height of the pandemic, economic crisis, and we saw very clearly how education and economic stability and opportunity were correlated. So as one example, those who were permanently let go as a result of COVID, 17% of those without a post-secondary degree or certificate were permanently let go versus 8% of those with. When we looked at job satisfaction data, which is in our report, issues like opportunities to advance, having fair pay, work benefits, opportunities to kind of continue through education and training. Education was very closely tied with higher job satisfaction across the board. Now, this is also a really interesting insight from that portion of the survey, which was to say, if you are a parent of children 18 or younger, is the cost of childcare preventing you from going back to work or school? And a significantly high number of Arizonans sharing that cost is a barrier from advancing in work or school. And you see that for income under 36,000, again, for Arizonans, much higher rates. The limited availability of childcare preventing me from going back to work or school, 22% of Arizonans. And again, much higher when you look at that income level. So again, looking at kind of where are we today, how are Arizonans experiencing life, and what are some of the potential causes, factors, underlying conditions of those outcomes. Environment and sustainable future. So we saw very clearly in the data, Arizonans love our outdoors and are really proud of and satisfied with the natural beauty, outdoor parks, playgrounds, and trails. So really high levels of satisfaction and pride there. And in terms of action to really preserve and protect our natural spaces and to have that sustainable future and quality of life for future generations, this was again an area with really high consensus. So I shared that those highly qualified teachers and principals, that was a tie for the top consensus item. It was tied with this 92% preserving and protecting our rivers, natural areas, and wildlife. These other issues I think are really interesting because they're also an area where the statewide consensus really shines through. So putting regulations in place to protect rural water supplies, very strongly supported, whether you're an urban Arizonan, rural, suburban, small city, that's a widespread consensus item. Same goes reducing the heat island in our urban areas, something that is shared across the state. So I think what really came through in looking through the data was that notion of this being truly a statewide set of actions and statewide agenda. So civic engagement and leadership, my passion, and I know a passion of all of you here today, which is really exciting, wanted to share some of the insights that we've gathered here, again, in kind of assets and challenges. So one really powerful finding, I think, particularly in the context of the past year and when the survey was fielded, was this hunger from Arizonans to work together. So 75% saying we want to work together across difference to solve problems. 56% saying we agree, we're confident other Arizonans will do that we can pull together to solve problems, and pretty low disagreement on those. So an asset to build upon. However, a significant challenge that we saw in our 2009 survey continues today of faith in our elected leadership. So just 28% of Arizonans agreeing that we have strong leaders who can lead through tough times. And then when you look at the breakdown of these data points, so focused on long-term visionary planning, representing diverse Arizona voices, using data to make decisions, 26% believing that our leaders work across party lines. So pretty significant issues with confidence and trust in our institutions and our elected leaders. So something that's really interesting in the action items then that we asked in this kind of civic engagement, civic life sphere was, what about our election system? What are the high consensus areas where we all agree we want to move forward? And a few areas really emerged. So 79% of Arizonans support or favor offering early in-person voting for weeks leading up to Election Day. 77% support offering automatic voter registration. And then 73% support sending all registered voters a ballot by mail while still having those in-person voting options. These other issues, near 60%, like offering same-day voter registration, we don't have it captured here, but we asked about the idea of ranked choice voting as well, had about 60% statewide support on that issue as well. So really high numbers of support for making our elections accessible and convenient. So again, these actions of where we agree and we have strong consensus as a community statewide prompt that dialogue about where are we headed and how do we get there. Just a couple more topics to touch on in terms of the data. In fair, just, and equitable systems, there were a number of dimensions reported on here. One is when I mentioned that list of top issues of importance to the state's success, there was a significant number of issues presented for folks to prioritize and rank. Ending systemic racism bubbled to the top as one of those key issues to the state's future success. When asked about current race relations, only 28% agreeing that race relations are good. When asked about discrimination, we have data that slices that by if folks experience gender discrimination, if they've experienced discrimination based on race and ethnicity. About 53% of Black Arizonans reporting feeling discriminated against in the past year. Nearly 40% were Latino Arizonans and American Indian. So significant issues presented in the data, as well as some specific actions that I'll come to in just a minute. And then finally, we asked a number of policy and kind of action questions in the immigration reform space and found resounding support statewide across the board for comprehensive immigration reform that includes a pathway to citizenship, and particularly a pathway to citizenship for our dreamers. So very strong support, again, when you look at various subgroups and ways of analyzing the data. So with all of that information, what that leads to when you take that kind of in its whole is an action agenda for Arizona's future for the decade ahead. The next 10 years, a comprehensive set of actions where Arizonans really agree we need to get to work. So when you look at these kind of comprehensively, education, this was the full set of those high consensus action items. Everything from that focus on high qualified teachers, principals, post-secondary enrollment, making civics education a key priority in K-12 emerged as highly supported and favored across the state, and spending more money investing in K-12 public education. All of those meeting that threshold of really high consensus action items. In health and well-being, I touched on a couple of these earlier, but again, you can see kind of the expansiveness from both individual to sort of systems-wide action. So the desire for affordable healthcare without risk of financial harm that protects Arizonans with pre-existing conditions, supporting making mental health services available and affordable, also looking at how do we manage as a state public health emergencies, the quality reporting, the public reporting on the quality of hospitals, issues like telemedicine. So everything from individual to kind of systems level in health and well-being. In jobs and economic opportunity, when you look through the data from economic stability, through career satisfaction, opportunities to advance access to post-secondary, these actions clearly are illuminated by the data, needing more opportunities to advance education, training, to build careers for the long term, particularly for younger Arizonans, providing those affordable, high quality options for childcare. If you think back to that data showing where that might be a barrier for folks feeling like they could really advance, and ensuring and building an equitable and inclusive economic recovery, particularly prompted in looking at that data coming from the peak of the pandemic. In environment and sustainable future, a number of actions really specific on supporting that management of resources, high quality of life, and sustainability into the future. In civic engagement and leadership, opportunities to create a pipeline of leaders. So really excited to be talking with all of you today about this kind of shared passion and mission of when we looked at how Arizonans feel about leaders today, how are we coming together to create the conditions, the systems, the opportunities to really set the stage differently. So we have civic leaders who are thinking long-term about the future, representative of the state's population, responsive, data-driven. So that underlying kind of civic health that we need to really be able to advance on any of the issues in this agenda, and also really specific to those issues in our elections. In the theme of and the shared value of fair, just, and equitable systems, talked about addressing systemic racism and discrimination, ensuring that the justice system treats everyone fairly. There was a specific action with very high consensus on focusing more on rehabilitation in the justice system as well. And in immigration reform, those areas that I highlighted in the data very strongly supported around pathway to citizenship, comprehensive immigration reform, pathway to citizenship for our dreamers. So I'm going to pause there. I saw that we have some questions coming through. So I will, before I share a little bit about kind of next steps and actions, I'm going to stop my screen and look at the questions for just a minute. Okay, the first question that I'll respond to, our elected officials provided a copy of this report. Excellent question. So that speaks a little bit to our strategy and the work ahead for this survey in the Arizona We Want. We are working closely to get this information out widely. So we are working with partners like the League of Cities and Towns to collaborate on their annual conference and share this information. We're working closely with regional government as well. So in Northern Arizona, Council of Governments in Pinal County and others who have been using the progress meters actually to really align their long-term planning and goal setting with the priorities of Arizonans. So I think that idea of how do we get this information out widely and to our elected leaders and start that conversation is really critical. That comes back to one of the kind of central themes and understandings of this work for the center is this is an agenda for Arizona, for all of us, that we don't achieve the Arizona we want without the work of all of us together. So I think, I can talk a little bit about sort of the call to action, how we might work together on that, but I think elected leaders are a really key component of that work together. So the next question, what on the survey seems different than what we see from our leaders, and how can we push them to support what Arizonans want? Another fantastic question. So this was something, as we went through the survey analysis and interpretation and drafting of a report, we went out actually to 50 critical readers across the state with partner organizations to say, we need your help making sense of this data and figuring out how do we best kind of tell this story. And that was something early on, one of the questions that we wrestled with and continue to be in dialogue with our partners about, is to say, we have this powerful, amazing story that for many people is maybe counter to sort of the kind of public discourse or public narrative or the national narrative, that shows this high consensus common ground and hunger for action. And yet there's a disconnect often with what we see in policy solutions or responses to that. So I think for us, the work ahead is how do we use this agenda of 42 actions to really organize collectively as partners, as communities, as leaders to say, let's get to work in these. These are areas where we agree and there's clear paths forward. Let's get to work here. But also the work that I know you all are doing, that Adam is doing, and that we're partnering on, is how do we strengthen our civic capacity as a state to make sure that the priorities of our residents are really aligning with decision-making and policy. And for me, maybe because I lead our civic health work, that's my focus. One of the key strategies is bolstering civic health, civic engagement, civic leadership, making sure that we're empowering young people to have their voices heard, that we're designing systems that are inclusive and responsive. For me, that's a clear path of how do we get kind of our priorities and our shared consensus as Arizonans lining up with the decisions that we make collectively, but a really key component of this work. And I think that speaks to the next question too. Sounds like Arizona is motivated to work together. Why isn't that happening at the legislature? And I think that comes back to what I was just sharing. We've had a lot of these conversations with our partners about how do we really use this kind of renewed and new understanding of the Arizona we want today and action agenda for the future to really drive that work. And it's through elected leaders, outreach, like I just said, and engagement and close conversation and collaboration, but it's also cross-sector. It's with our community partners, it's with our education leaders, with our private sector leaders. The goal is really focusing on that alignment then of action around those priorities. And then, yes, and this final question for now, all this sounds like Arizona is more forward thinking than many people think. How do we motivate communities to turn out and move conversations in this direction? Another awesome question. I think one hope, and I'll come back to kind of the actions that you all might be able to take after hearing the information today and how you might be able to collaborate with us as a center. One of our hopes is to help provide the framework and the narrative and to drive an understanding of who we are as Arizonans and what we all share as our public values and our hopes and aspirations for the future, to set the stage for exactly that kind of organizing and mobilization. So I think that's a really powerful question and directly in line with how we hope the information can be embraced and really run with. And I'll say, just as one specific example, work that we're now having the opportunity to do with Adam and with other civic organizations across the state is really to take one piece of this and to say, for example, within civic engagement, we have data through our civic health progress meters that are tracking, well, how are we doing yearly on these issues? So if you look at civic life from volunteerism, neighborhood involvement, voter participation, advocacy, how are we doing as Arizonans? How are we engaged What are the assets? What are the potential challenges? And what we're doing right now is we're working with a group of other civic organizations to say, with this data, how do we then collectively use that to tell a bigger story about civic life in Arizona, to help illuminate where there are gaps and why, and then to start to have those discussions. What are the strategies that actually respond to those issues and create better conditions, for civic engagement to thrive? What are the decisions we need to make, whether it's in policy or our investments or our programming, that are really responsive to that? And how do we tell a bigger story collectively about the importance of that? That our civic life, our civic leadership, our civic engagement are really key to our ability to advance any of this agenda. And I know that all of you who are on the call today really share that understanding and that mission in the work that you're doing. So there aren't any other current questions, so I'm going to flip back for a second and show you ways that you can get involved before inviting Adam to chime in with any thoughts as well. All right, so we all have a role to play. So your questions were completely on the mark in terms of what we hope to do with this information, how we hope to collaborate, and ultimately, how do we start to get closer to realizing the Arizona we want, where we know what we're all concerned about, what we hope for the future, and how are we moving forward on those. First is sharing this information and kind of amplifying the findings. So would love to work with all of you in getting this information out widely. If you would like to do a presentation for the organizations where you work, where you serve, we would love to collaborate on that as well. So really starting by getting the information out. And again, that story of look at this kind of powerful action agenda for the 10 years ahead. So that prompts the discussion. We also invite you to take a look with your personal interests, goals, or your organizations. So we have the ability to take the survey itself on our website that folks who are participating in the Gallup Arizona survey took. So you can actually see how your responses track or compare with those statewide findings. So that's available as an individual right away on our website. If you want to do that as an organization or a group, please reach out and we're happy to help facilitate that. So that's kind of the next level of engagement, is to really start to explore how do our respective interest priorities match up statewide. And then the other is really getting into this space of using the findings to inform decision making. So all of us looking at our respective organizations, our policies, our practice, our programs, our investments of time, of resources. Where are there opportunities to align? Where are you already aligned? And this could potentially provide greater lift and fuel, and the reminder that the work that you're doing is so strategically connected to advancing the Arizona we want. And are there opportunities to look at new actions or new areas of emphasis, and collaborating with others to do that? And then in the partnership space, as I mentioned at the beginning, CFA has a deep set of work in education, in workforce, in civic engagement. I'm working with my colleague who's with us today, Madison, on our school participatory budgeting work that is expanding across Arizona to really equip and empower young people to get involved in decision making in their school communities and really be prepared and engaged for lifelong civic engagement. So we have a number of projects and work happening aligned with a number of these actions in the agenda. So would welcome further discussion, conversation. How do we collaborate on some of those? How do we work together to really move the needle? So for any of that information, the findings that I've shared today, presented in a lengthy and beautiful full report that I hope you'll read, is available for download on our website, arizonafuture.org. The access to take the survey that I mentioned is there as well. If you're interested in holding a community conversation or a briefing or presentation on some of this data, or in figuring out how do we work together to kind of amplify these findings, tell that story, please reaching out to me directly or through our website. My email is Christy Tate, so it's kristi.tate@arizonafuture.org. We'll make sure y'all have that information as well. So we would welcome that opportunity. So I'm going to stop share again and see if we had any other questions or anything come up in the chat. And I'll invite Adam too to jump in if there's things that I missed or things that you would want to add on to.
Well, Chrissy, I want to thank you for that presentation. I think the information in that that you all have compiled shows us, and I think there's a question about this, that Arizona is really forward thinking. There's a lot of parts of that about the same day voter registration, protections for the environment, immigration issues that I truly don't think our leaders that we have elected in our communities align with a lot. And definitely not even a partisan thing. We have a lot of leaders that don't look at what those needs are in the community, I think. And so I'm just, some of the information I'm shocked by, but also some of it I'm very like, yeah, of course we knew that, and so it's good to have it in data so we can use that and we can go to people in our community and say, look, Arizonans want this. Arizonans believe in this. We want this for our communities. We want this as a priority of our decision makers. So it's just wonderful to be able to actually see this data. I remember the first time around with the first survey report using that data for years afterwards, because it's like, look, it's right here on paper. So having it again is just, we're just very fortunate for the work that you all have put into this. So thank you for doing that and providing it to us.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you. And that's really the hope. And I'm now seeing some folks in the chat sharing that too, of this really demonstrating the case of why HLI is so important in the work that you all are doing. And I think that's exactly right for our partner organizations, like you all, to see reflected how much the kind of public will is behind those types of efforts. And this type of kind of forward motion is really powerful to be reminded of and to help make the case. So for the work that's already aligned with those 42 actions, using this data to document, to lift up, to bolster the case, whether that's from a policy advocacy point of view, a funding resourcing point of view, collective impact point of view, this really kind of helps bolster that. And then it does also present those opportunities to take a closer look. Where is the data prompting new questions or new insights? Again, of where are there barriers to opportunity? How can we unpack those disparities further and understand what are some of the strategies that could be more responsive? So our hope is to really provide that data as a resource in service of all of those kinds of discussions. So I'm glad that it's been useful.
There was a question in the chat that ended up in the chat that says, how can we use this survey to build a strategic plan for our state? Which I think you kind of touched on that in some of what you talked about with, how we can use this information and how we can engage with this information with the policymakers. Is there any suggestions that you would have from within your position about how organizations can take this data and really, I guess, put it straight into use in whatever industry they might be in, whatever community they might be serving in, how they could really use this data as soon as they get it?
Yeah, such a great question. So a couple of examples I just alluded to that have been used as kind of models with our progress meters data, I think apply really nicely here. And some of that is in, like I said, sort of that government elected leaders space of working with organizations. And it doesn't need to be government, it can be nonprofit organizations, philanthropy, who are setting strategic plans, 3, 5 years, 10 years out. Setting those goals and kind of measurable outcomes to use this data as an opportunity and these actions and high consensus items to infuse into those plans. I mean, part of our hope, if we think kind of collectively about regional plans, statewide plans, ultimately our collective success being measured by how we're doing on the issues that matter most to Arizonans is one of the hopes and the aspirations of this kind of work. So I think we're seeing that happen with the use of progress meters to date. And now that this new information from Gallup is available, being able to infuse that into those kind of strategic regional plans. As organizations, I know for ourselves, even at the center, we're doing the same right now of taking a look at those shared public values, the 42 actions, and working as an impact team, for example, to say, where do we see alignment in existing initiatives? Where there are opportunities or gaps, where greater emphasis might be needed, where greater collaboration might be needed. So doing some of that scan to say, where does our own work sit and where is the work of others? And then how do we kind of either collaborate or drive work directly? Is I know conversations that we're having internally and with some of our partners as well, and really encourage that. And that's something too, as organizations, if you're interested in having kind of the community conversation type format, that's something we've been doing as a team, is sharing out data and then having space to sort of unpack some of that together. What resonates, what's surprising, what's not, where does it align with opportunities for action? So kind of taking it one step further in breaking apart some of that data is something that we're happy to explore too, in partnership with others.
So I do want to remind everybody, if you have any last questions or comments, please go ahead and throw it in the chat or the Q&A function below. I think there's something significant that you might have touched on, but I want to just highlight is, this talking about the next decade of Arizona. We as a program are working to adapt our programming to planning for that next decade. We look at 2030 as a milestone for the Latinx community here in Arizona, and potentially a year of large shifts in the way that our state might be led. And so this is something that it's coming very, very quickly. It's amazing how quickly the time is going, that we're already almost, in a couple months entering 2022. So this stuff is so important to have as resources as we come into next election season, as we come into even at, I'm even thinking of what you're talking about with individual plans and city councils with budget conversations that are happening in school districts. Curriculum planning. This information is really, really important for some of those conversations. And I just think it's so great to actually see this, but also for many of us who've been doing this work, it is truly just confirmation that the direction that a lot of our organizations are working in elevating these voices, elevating these topics, is going the right direction.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, couldn't emphasize that enough. I think the power of seeing kind of that broad base of support behind that action and movement, and that 10-year horizon is really powerful. I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, that when you envision kind of taking the survey or how folks are responding, that really was the framing, was in the 10 years ahead, what kind of actions are needed, what are the most important issues to the future. So it has that kind of forward thinking frame of mind in how the questions were asked, and really demonstrates here's where we need to go long term. And that 2030 mark is certainly where we've seen, for example, the education progress meter. That's where those goals are set, is for 2030. So for example, getting to post-secondary attainment 60% by 2030, we're at 46% statewide right now. So in some ways can be daunting, but is also a powerful motivator and kind of catalyst for each of us in our work to say, what part do we own of that kind of statewide progress? And over 10 years, let's think about, how we ladder up to that in terms of our strategies and activities. So that's definitely what we hope. And absolutely right. 10 years from 2009, significant change, right, as a state, and where we are today. And then to think about 10 years ahead, it's pretty amazing.
Definitely. I think that's a great point, especially that I guess we're looking forward to the 2030 report.
Yeah, exactly. That's our commitment. 10 years out, we'll have another one to see where we stand on the Arizona we want. So we'll look forward to it.
Hopefully one day it'll just be the Arizona we have, and that we're happy.
Yes, we're living it. Yeah.
So I do want to say, it looks like we have no more questions in there, but I do want to draw everybody to look at the chat because you can find where you can download the survey and request a presentation, which I think would be fantastic for if you have an organization that could use this, and take a look at the work that they've done. The link is in the chat, as well as Christy's email address, so you can connect with her. I will also send out that link as well as her email address in an email to all of the participants who joined us today. And we're going to take this recording. We'll edit it just to make it concise, and then we'll share it with all of you again, so you can go back and take a look at it and kind of see some of the information that you might want to revisit. I do want to say though, and I said this in the chat, HLI is really excited to be a part of the conversations that CFA is having around civic health. And It's an important tenet of our program, and it's been an important tenet of our program since we were started 35 years ago. So we're excited about being a part of those conversations and seeing if there's more opportunities for us to work together on projects and really engage our HLI Familia in the work that CFA is doing. We're really excited for those opportunities on the horizon.
Nice. Thank you so much. Well, yeah, we are too. And directly, as you saw in that civic engagement set of actions supported by Arizonans, the work of HLI and the work that we can all do together is just really squarely in line with what we all want for our civic life. So excited to keep doing that together.
Definitely. Well, seeing nothing else, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We'll let you go a little bit early. I told you you always get out by 2 p.m. with these conversations, and we're having you out 8 minutes early. But I want to thank you all for the work that you're doing in the community. Thank you for coming back and being a part of these conversations. And most of all, to you and your families, please do stay safe and stay engaged during everything that's going on. Christy, thank you very much, and looking forward to talking to everyone again very soon.
Okay, that sounds great. Thanks, everyone.
Have a great afternoon, everyone. Bye.